So good afternoon. I'm Marina Morrow with Simon Fraser University, and I'm here with Peter Tomlinson. It's Thursday, June 24th at about 10 to 1, and we're going to be talking about the history of the Coast Foundation. So welcome, Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much. Pleased to do this.
Because we're on a radio show.
Yes.
A TV show. Anyway, so I guess what I thought of just asking you by way of starting is to talk about kind of when you first, I guess, became aware of Coast Foundation and how you got involved.
Well, I was a student at SFU in sociology, political science, and some of my friends at the time were associated or were friends of some unemployed teachers.
Right.
Back around 70, 71, there was really a surplus of teachers coming out of the schools and not the jobs. So a group of those unemployed teachers, they had an organization and they applied for an LIP grant to keep busy and do something.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to the Vancouver Parks Board as a sponsor, because you needed a government or an agency sponsor for a local initiatives grant.
Right.
They got the grant to work with ex-Riverview patients who were in Vancouver boarding homes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So how did that interest come about for them?
And they, to get the grant for socialization recreation programs.
Right.
So through the Parks Board, they used the Parks Board facilities.
Right.
I think it was Kitsilano and Collingwood community centers,
Right.
and bring these boarding home residents into these community centers and run programs in the afternoon.
Okay.
Either crafts or reading and various sorts of things. We call it probably recreational therapy now.
Right.
Well, they managed to get hold of a small bus, and they wanted a bus driver. So through mutual friends, I found out about this.
Right.
And to put myself through university, I was driving taxi,
Okay.
you see, and I had my Class 4 license here in BC.
Right.
And I said, well, I'll try that.
Yeah.
So I went in and drove this small bus, and would, during my times I wasn't in class,
All right.
and pick up some of these residents and then take them to the community centers. Well, what was I going to do but sit there and wait for them to finish a couple
Right.
hours later and take them back? So I sort of got involved with some of the residents,
Right.
and there was some interest there. Enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I think the grant starts in September, runs through the spring, and then they have to reapply.
Right.
Well, some of the people left, and some of the people that I knew, which were sort of, ex-60s, student culture, psychedelic culture kind of thing, sort of wanted to do something else for this group, right?
Okay.
And so I got involved with these plans, and the plans were, well, we should rent a house, create a clubhouse, do something more interesting, because for the residents, they were just coming out of a boarding home, which were largely medicated people. They were just sitting around watching TV, going to a community center, which was very institutional.
Yeah.
And we wanted to, rent a house and get sort of a more vibrant, interesting environment for them. Well, the Parks Board wasn't that interested in doing that, so and some of the teachers were moving on.
Right.
So we took over the LIP grants. I came on as administrator for those grants,
Okay.
with the application, doing the applications.
Right.
And this would be, if I recall, probably spring 71.
Okay.
Might have been spring 72. It was a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah. And then we went to VGH, Social Services Department, and asked them if they could be the sponsor through VGH, and they agreed. So we moved from the Parks Board
To VG.
So VGH, it was the Social Services Department at the time. They agreed to be our sponsor
Right.
in association with the Vancouver Welfare Department, because it was before Provincial Human Resources.
Right.
And they supported our move to create this kind of drop-in recreation center. So we got an old house, rented a house up on Kingsway and St. Catherine Street. It's
Okay.
been torn down.
Yeah.
It dated from about the 1920s, very large, 3 floors, large living room, veranda, and painted it bright colors, yellow and green and red, and got very artistic, you see.
Right.
And with the bus, we were able to pick residents up at any time. So with the welfare department, we got permission to go into the boarding homes, and they encouraged that, because they were sponsoring, they were administrative responsible for licensing the homes, you see,
Right.
so they would get the operators to open the homes up for us. And then the social services department sort of opened doors for us with the Vancouver Hospital Psych Ward, you know, with some of their outpatients. So the group started to expand.
Right.
I mean, the sort of our terms of activity started to expand.
Right.
So we were very busy. It was a very busy group. And then the members of the LIP project then said, well, you know, why not become our own sponsor and create a society and get some people on board. So that's how Coast Foundation Society started. So I was one of the co-founders of that
Of the actual
society.
society.
Yeah, we became I think there was 5 members, we became the board members. I could probably recall the names if I dug into my memory.
Before you go there, I was interested in what you said when you sort of halfway through this, you mentioned kind of the ethos of the time and that there were people who were, you know, coming out of the 60s psychedelic
Yeah.
time period. So what was, if you could sort of describe kind of from your perspective, like what was happening in mental health at that time period that kind of allowed this to...
Well, we weren't all that aware at that time of what was happening overall in the country or sort of
Just tell us.
in psychiatry. That wasn't really our so much our interest in our backgrounds.
Right.
I mean, I probably had the closest background. I think I had a course in sociology of mental health at SFU.
Right.
The others not so much. You know, this was sort of something interesting to do. There was a little bit of socio-political tones to it, you know, a little activism
Right.
involved with some members. I think different people had different motivations. A couple just wanted a job, you know,
Right.
but we got, you know, we sort of pulled all these interests together and
Right.
created this Coast Foundation.
Yeah, I find that
But,
interesting.
you know, finding out later on as we sort of tried to get more support, and the more support you get and the more you expand your PR, fundraising, you have to learn more about what you're doing. So, you
Yeah.
know, this was a sort of a learning experience over time. But what was happening in psychiatry at the time, I guess we could really contribute a lot to a few of the American states, particularly New York, which started a very aggressive deinstitutionalization program in the
Right.
50s under their governor at the time, Rockefeller, was really
Right.
pushing this. And we knew more about New York because Dr. John Cumming, who was probably 73, 74, became a very big supporter of Coast Foundation, was the head of the psychiatric hospital system in New York State.
Oh, okay.
So there was influences from those deinstitutionalizations and community programs that came into this province,
Right.
largely through him because he was hired as a senior consultant
Maybe just
by
pause.
the province.
Pause for 1 second. She's concerned about something.
In the 50s.
Right.
Was occurring in BC as well.
Right, and having
Because
that
I don't
impact.
have the exact numbers, but I think in the early 60s, Riverview Hospital being our
Yeah.
main institution, had up towards 4,000 or 5,000 patients.
Yeah.
But by the time that Coast Foundation got started in, let's say, 71, 72, they were down, I think it was over half they were down by half,
Yeah.
over half of that. So where did they put the people? Well, they put them in provincial boarding homes,
Right.
which were basically community institutions, a lot of them. It depended on the operator. Some were better than others, of course.
Yeah.
Vancouver took a large group of this population out of Riverview Hospital. I think we got involved eventually in about 16 or 17 boarding homes. So if you look at those numbers, it's several hundred people. And then there were others too that we weren't going into. Now the province of BC had its own administration for licensing in British Columbia, and then Vancouver had its.
Okay,
There
so
was some
two.
separation there.
Right.
I got to know the person that was really instrumental in getting that going in the 60s. It was a Florence, Ireland. She worked for the BC government, based out in the Burnaby, what used to be the Burnaby Mental Health Center.
Right.
And got to know her quite well. And she had been doing that job for many years, responsible for the licensing and also expanding the program to help mental health, the Ministry of Health, Mental Health Branch, depopulate Riverview.
Right.
So we got involved, the Local Initiatives Grant got involved at a good time because there was very little going on in the community
Yeah.
for the boarding home residents. And as Coast Foundation, and then I became one of the 5 people that founded it. You know, I said, Peter, you want to be director? Sure, okay. Kind of, got into that role, became largely the PR person, going out, doing the fundraising, doing the lobbying, deciding, who to go to, and
So
for
what
funding.
what was the composition of the board then? Was it, so it was all folks that had been involved in those early kinds of...
Yeah. There was a John Sakely who he was ex-SFU, he was a student at SFU. He was sort of one of the more creative people involved in saying, well, how should we run this house and this drop-in center, very energetic, and he would get volunteers involved.
Right.
There was a Jerry Yvon. He was a master's student at SFU in English. He was a bit of the philosopher type, bringing a few people in from his background. There was a Henry Inoue, Japanese descent. And he worked for Nally's, and he just lived in the house that we got, because the upstairs we took the downstairs, and then he became a subtenant because he was taking a room upstairs. So he said, yeah, this sounds really great, I'll get involved too. So we needed board members to make the application to under the Societies Act. So there was the 4 of us. I can't remember the 5th person. No, I can't remember the 5th person. Okay. But just different backgrounds, and whoever is interested. Right? We didn't go out and seek special people with special backgrounds. It was just whoever was interested. That was sort of hangers-on and got more involved and that sort of thing. The LIP, to give you some sense of size, the LIP grant, I believe, funded about 13 or 14 people. Okay. And it's quite substantial. Yeah, it was substantial. Yeah. And the teacher group got that going. Right. And then as they attracted more people and some of them moved on, then we took over the LIP grant. I think we got it up to about 16 or 18 people. Right. Very little money for program expense. So I think you were only fund people. You were only allowed maybe 10% or so of your salary component, because the purpose of the LIP was to employ young people. Right. Right. Not fund expenses. Yeah. So we had to get our expenses elsewhere. Oh, okay. And that's what led us, well, me primarily, to go out and find money. And we got a little bit through VGH, I recall, not much, just for food and that kind of thing when we were bringing people into the boarding homes. A little bit from Vancouver Welfare Department, because we ended up, putting up coffee and donuts for people. So were you able to use the money for the rental for the house, or? I don't know if we want to keep this one on film, but one of the people said, well, I'll take the salary, I have other sources of income, and I'll just throw the money back in. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. We weren't allowed to do that. But, he participated here and there, but he threw the money back in for expenses, and we paid the rent out of that. Okay. Creative ways of making this happen. Yeah. But eventually went to Vancouver Foundation, went to social planning at Vancouver City. Right. As Vancouver Welfare wanted us to do more, so we don't have any money. Well, go see, I think it was Jonathan Baker, who was head of social planning at the time. Go see social planning at City Hall. Right. Go talk to some of the council members. So that's how I talked to was it Phil Rankin at the time. Right. Darlene Mazzari was a council member, and she became quite supportive of Coast and these kind of operations. Yeah. So their support then helped to... Well, eventually it led to presentations to committees of council. I think there was a social planning committee, if I recall. So I had made some presentations to them, and we got some money for vehicles. Right. That'd be about 72, 73. We didn't go a long time without any money. Right. It sort of grew exponentially. So in the programming... And we got money for a couple of our own buses. Okay. So we expanded the 2 like 12, 15 passenger vans.
Right.
Plus we had this original old bus, which someone had donated.
Oh, okay.
That's how about a 22 passenger bus to pick
Okay.
people up. So by that time we had the 3 vehicles. We needed 3 drivers, and we were doing an awful lot of bringing people into this drop-in center, as well as on a daily, 5 days a week, taking the residents out anywhere from Deep Cove to the Rifle Sanctuary, all over, basically this end of the Lower Mainland.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you about, was the programming. So
So we had some people in charge of programming. I wasn't in charge of that, social programming.
Right.
Oh, I think it's, Vicki Morris.
Right.
She had emigrated from the U.S. and she had some background in recreational services down in the U.S.
Right.
And I think Virginia. She was from Virginia. Very energetic girl, and she took charge of a lot of the social programming.
Right.
And then eventually an ex-nurse came on board. Like, she had gotten out of the nursing profession and wanted to do volunteer work in the community, so she came on board. So that helped us a lot too.
So is it fair to say that the early people involved, none of them were sort of really trained in mental health per se?
No.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Which I think led to a lot of the success that we had, because we were doing different things.
Right.
And the residents responded. I think we called clients or something.
Right.
Yeah, they responded very well, and a few of them started moving out of the boarding homes. When we realized sort of what we were doing in our role in community mental health and community support services, it took us a while to realize where we sort of fit in.
Yeah.
We knew some of the people in MPA.
Okay.
They were the activists, they were the lobbyists. They weren't interested in drop-in centers. Well, they had a drop-in center. I mean, they weren't interested in organized programs so much,
Right.
if I recall. We weren't a lobby group. We had some sort of a little bit more conservative. We had, things we wanted to do recreationally, a few things we wanted to do in housing. We were thinking of our own housing. MPA had a couple of group homes, or had one group home at the time.
All right.
So we were thinking along the same lines, what would be appropriate.
Yeah.
But when we realized that we were contributing to the movement of people out of boarding homes, then where were those beds being filled from? Well, they're being filled from Riverview.
Right.
And a few from the Vancouver Psych Ward. And when we realized where we fit in, we thought, well, there's another source of money somewhere.
Right.
That's how we saw it.
Right.
And so we went to the province. And there was a paper released about late '72 called Community Care Services for Greater Vancouver, I believe. And it was written by Dr. John Cumming, who had been hired recently as a consultant for the Ministry of Health,
Right.
for the mental health branch. And they had been working with Greater Vancouver Health Services, or there was a health board, and the province to try and establish community care teams
Right.
in the city of Vancouver. And I got a hold of a copy of this paper, and I said, well, we fit right in. They're talking about us.
Right.
They don't even know we exist. Because we weren't dealing with the province at that
Right.
time.
Right.
We were dealing pretty much with the city and getting our support through different city organizations.
Yeah.
So I went to a conference he was holding where he was addressing a group of people. I got in, went up to him after the conference, and I said, Dr. Cumming, you're talking about us, in your paper. We need money, and I think you need us. The kind of approach.
Yeah, right.
And he was quite amused at this, because I had long hair at the time. And so he said, well, I'll come up and see what you're doing. So he came up to the drop-in
Right.
center a week or so later. And said, yeah, I think you should come over to Victoria and meet the Associate Deputy Minister of Mental Health.
Cool.
And so I did, and they were interested. So eventually we got some money through the province, because they had a fund. Mental Health had set up a fund called the Community Care Services Society,
All right.
and they were somehow channeled money into that. which didn't disappear at the end of the fiscal year.
Right.
It stayed
You could
over,
use
so
it.
we got a little bit of money out of that, and a lot of political support. So really a big debt is owed to Dr. John Cumming,
Right.
because when we eventually presented him a housing plan for apartment housing, independent apartment housing, I'll get back to later if you want
Yeah.
how that came about. He was a big supporter of that.
Right.
And it was through this Community Care Services Society we got our first sustaining grant to fund the operations of that first apartment block, which was in the West End.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how we went from the city support to the provincial support.
All right. And so the provincial side really had no idea then that this kind of stuff was going on at the city level? Like it just wasn't on their radar?
No,
Yeah.
no, we weren't that public really at
Right.
that time.
Right.
Yeah. We had supporters through City Hall, but not,
Right.
and through the local health board, but not really the province until we had contacted him.
Right.
Yeah.
And so tell me again, sorry, his role, Dr. John Cummings, he was
Well, he was hired as consultant by the province
Okay.
to look at the needs of community care. That's, professional community care
Right.
in the city, and then he had come up with the plan, with others, I'm sure,
Right.
to establish these community care teams, mental health teams, headed up by a psychiatrist. It was a psychiatric model in
Yeah.
the community.
Yeah.
Social workers, psych nurses,
Right.
basically to administer to the chronic psychiatric patients, usually with schizophrenia,
Right. That were coming out of Riverview.
that were coming out of Riverview. But when he saw that this recreational role, that services we were providing were helping to sustain people.
Right.
And then over this time at Coast, we had some people that were interested in, life skills support,
Right.
shopping and managing money. So, I think, Coast sort of expanded its support for some of the people into that area. It wasn't just recreation.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it's almost like it's, you started kind of on your own and then started to get this kind of wider support. Was there, one question I had for you was at that time, so you had the board and then you had all these activities going on. I know now that Coast runs with like a membership kind of model. They have this idea of people being members of the foundation, and so it's a lot of people who actually have had experience in the
Yeah.
system. Where did that start, or was that part of that early?
Well, the clients were, along a large, quite a broad range of capabilities
Right.
and interest. And there were some people that were got more involved,
Right.
in the activities. Unpaid staff, kind of volunteers
Right.
on the bus, and then the drop-in center.
Right.
And I think after in the second year or third year of the society, certainly by '73.
Right.
I remember one fellow was on the board, and then as the housing projects got going, they got more involved in that.
Right.
The society as a membership, we didn't keep a membership role. We just
Yeah.
had the 5 board members.
Just the 5 board
Yeah.
members. And then the people
And-
that were employed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think that membership model came up later,
Right.
either towards the end of when I was leaving or
Or after.
yeah. Our big focus was 73 to 74, and then I left, I think, later in 74,
Right.
was housing.
Yeah, so tell me how did that get started then?
Well, we were aware of what MPA was doing.
Right.
They had a group home, and we had, some of us had been over there. We had, to us, what they were doing was, they seemed to be younger people, more active, more politically active.
Right.
They didn't seem to be dealing with the, providing any kind of a support model for the chronic schizophrenics.
Right.
Our typical client group would probably be 20, 30 years older than the typical MPA
Right.
group. I went to a couple of their meetings. They were different than our meetings. They were a true membership model. I think you had to be, a patient at some point to be a member,
Right.
whereas we came more from the
Community more generally.
community, you know, middle class kind of young people trying to do something, right?
Yeah.
And typically our clients at the time were out of the boarding homes. They'd been in Riverview 20, 30 years.
Okay. So long term.
Long term, yeah. And they were the chronic, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, not so much people in their acute phase.
Right.
Yeah.
So you guys started to look at the housing piece partly because you saw what MPA was doing, but also
Well, that sort of got us, I think, interested. Well, you know,
Right.
maybe we should have a model too.
right.
And, you know, what would that model be? A group home? You know, I don't think a lot of these people really wanted to live in groups. They'd
Right.
been in wards and boarding homes.
Right.
Talking about, maybe getting back to your question about membership participation, as we were going through and talking about this and looking at different models, they were involved. I mean, the people in the boarding homes were involved.
Right.
We knew a lot of them very well by that time.
Right.
Some were friends.
Right.
I remember my wife and I would run a bridge club for some people there, and
Right.
they were over to our house and that sort of thing. So it was very involved on a personal level with a large group of them.
Right.
So, but their reaction was, you know, I don't want to, you know, share a kitchen with other
Right.
people. You know, I've done that, right?
Yeah.
So more independent, but we haven't really quite got a model together. And this is where Jackie Hooper comes in,
Okay.
because she had been, well, you know, she had been in a hospital herself,
Yeah.
and she was a member of MPA, or had been, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
I think she had taken some of her concepts and talked to MPA about it. If I recall, I don't think they were interested in her kind of ideas. They were more of the group home.
Right.
Jackie, I believe, had approached the province as well and gotten some support. I don't think it was financial support, but some support from Human Resources
For the idea behind
for the
it.
ideas of that sort of thing. And then I remember when she did come over to us, to our drop-in center, it was her first visit there, and she goes, "Where is this Peter Tomlinson? I want to find him, you know, your director." And so ran into her, and she said, "You're interested in housing, what kind of housing?" I said, "Well, we're not really quite sure, you know,
Yeah.
independent housing, group homes, not sure how to fund it."
Right.
And she said, "Well, I have an idea, that is you put people in apartments and provide them some support with, you know, a paraprofessional
Right.
kind of support if they need help." But a lot of the chronics, and she was, you know, older person. I don't know if she was in her 30s, 40s at the time. I don't really
Right.
quite recall. I was in my 20s. Everybody looks older when you're in your
Yeah,
20s,
when
right? And she seemed to similar generation, perhaps, of some of the folks that we're working with.
Right.
And I said, "Well, you know, maybe that would work." And so she met some of the people that we were serving, and yeah, there was some interest. There were, I recall, several boarding home members that said, "Well, you know, if you get this place going, I want to live there."
Right.
Yeah. So we established call it a committee. There was myself, there was Jackie, Vicky Morris, the young girl from the States, who she was quite interested in. So we sort of divided up our roles. I would go out and try and get the money and the land, you know, figure out, you know, how do you get a building.
Yeah.
Vicky said, "Well, I'll be your paraprofessional support person and look after some of that support."
Right.
And then Jackie was going to try and get some more political support, if I recall. She was going to get, you know, work with some of the boarding home residents, sort of get them enthusiastic about it and that sort of thing. Yeah. So we went out. The group of us went out and got the first project.
So where did your funding come for that?
CMHC
Okay.
for capital.
Right.
Yeah.
To get the building.
Yeah, they had some funding programs at the time which would fund 100%
Right.
of community housing. I think it was meant for more or less cooperative housing,
Right.
and some types of social housing. I mean, when we first went to it, sort of blew us off. They said, "Well, you know, your society is 5 people,
Yeah.
you know, but technically." You get a little funding here, a little funding there. I mean, how are you going to support this?
Right.
But I kept going after them and going after them. One of our clients was quite politically active and was on the election committee for Ron Bassford.
Okay.
And he was the federal minister, represented the West End, federal minister of housing. CMHC was under him. So through one of our clients, this young fellow, we actually got a meeting with Ron Bassford.
Wow.
And then when the local CMHC office realized that we had some political connections, they started listening to us and said, well, we'll take an application.
Right.
But you need to show funding, because we were going to have, the rent we were charging would not cover all of our expenses, especially if you're going to have a staff member in there.
Right.
So this was about a year after our first meeting with Dr. John Cumming, so I went back to him. And several meetings with deputy ministers, associate deputy ministers in the Ministry of Health. We were able to get a commitment to fund the ongoing operational deficit.
Right.
So once we had that commitment, we went back to CMHC, and then they said, okay, we'll provide the capital, you just have to find a building.
Right.
So that was my job, was to find a building.
Right.
And I worked with one of the real estate companies in Kitsilano, and we eventually found a building in the West End. You know, size, age, price,
Right.
location. That was the Butte Pendrell,
Okay.
I think is
The first.
It's been rebuilt now. I think
Right.
Coast still has the property, but it's been rebuilt.
Right. So Coast still has it, that
I
particular
believe so, yeah.
okay.
Daryl was telling me that Coast has rebuilt that property.
Right.
It was an older building, it dated from the 40s.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, and it needed a lot of rehabilitation, so CMHC also had a program to pay for residential rehabilitation program,
Right.
RAP or something it was called. And so we got $15,000, $20,000 a suite to renovate, because
Okay.
you know, all new flooring, painting, appliances. So they were largely bachelor suites and one bedrooms.
One bedrooms.
Yeah. And
Must
then
have
I
been
think
fun.
Jackie worked with a lot of the groups, the people coming in terms of, you know, selection and pairing up if there was going to be any, you know, some of the one bedrooms I think had roommates and
Right.
you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. So it was a very exciting time
Yeah, it must have been.
when we realized that we had a building. I recall the owner of the building at the time, you know, one of the local investors, took our $10,000 deposit because he knew, because, you know, subject to CMHC approving 100% financing,
Right.
subject to the province following through on their commitment, subject to all this. He thought he was going to make an easy $10,000 on the deposit.
Right.
But we didn't. I got all the letters signed, sealed, and delivered,
Right.
and we took possession.
So he was surprised?
Yes, yeah. When we actually paid for the building, got
Yeah.
the building.
So it's interesting. So the buy-in from like the provincial government, from CMHC, what do you attribute that to? Was it that they could see that what you guys were doing was having some success with folks, was helping people recover?
I think social housing was just starting to become commonplace.
Right.
It was the Liberal government at the time, the federal government, was sort of pushing new ideas
Right.
through some of its ministers. So, you know, there seemed to be a mandate there.
Right.
We developed relationships with the local office, with the manager.
Right.
So it was a good, positive relationship. So I think, you know, they have to have confidence in the group they're funding.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that helped. When they realized we had the support from the province, they knew that, you know, their loan would be secure. I mean,
Right.
they have to make decisions based on financial security too.
Yeah.
So yeah, just the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
I don't think
timing.
they had a mandate for mental health housing,
All right.
but just this, I think this is the first one that they had supported
Right.
in the area of mental health. Yeah,
That's pretty historic.
yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, sort of way back when we were just sort of chatting about sort of the philosophy behind Coast, and I just wondered if you could talk about if there was any kind of stated philosophy of how people worked, or what people were bringing to the table in terms of how they provided the recreational programs, etc.
Yeah, there was a document on philosophy that a group of us got together and wrote at the time. I don't know whether it's still on the Coast Archives here. We realized we needed to write down what our philosophy was, because I'm sure that everybody had their own ideas.
Right.
There was some collective, common ideas, I'm sure, because we had made a presentation to, we were asked to make a presentation to a social services or mental health, it was a committee of the legislature, which was run by Rosemary Brown, was the MLA at the time, right? And out of she was up in Vancouver, and they wanted document on record. So I do recall that's the first time we wrote everything. We wrote down what we could think of and put in a document and submitted it to the committee. This is 40 years ago almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
We wanted to do something different. We realized most of these people, their formative years were, when they're in their 20s and their teens, were the 1930s,
right.
1930s, 1940s. Part of our philosophy was to create an environment that would evoke a period of positive memories that they might have had before they became ill, before they were institutionalized. So we tried to, duplicate that in this house.
Right.
Whether it worked or not, we couldn't necessarily say.
Yeah.
But participation by the clients in everything that we did, except the major decisions, obviously, because we were just plowing ahead on certain fundraising goals. So it wasn't until a few years later that the club membership idea came in,
right.
And the society was opened up. But participation in what they wanted to do, where they wanted to go, after about a year they pretty much ran the drop-in center,
Right.
Organizing activities and that sort of thing. We put some other things in there. I just don't recall
Right.
what they might be. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's interesting, because it would have been you would have been doing it in a way almost in a vacuum, in a sense, because there wasn't very much yet going on in community mental health. It was so new.
There was very little going on in community
Yeah.
mental health. MPA had a model.
Right.
It wasn't our model. There was a Canadian Mental Health Association.
Right.
I believe they had a drop-in, an activity center.
Okay.
They weren't doing we thought they were just too middle class. We
Right.
were in our 20s, we knew exactly what we were and what we wanted to do. And
Right.
we weren't going to deal with anybody that was older, had been around for a long time.
Right. Renegades.
Yeah.
So that house was established around 1970. The first house did
72.
around 72.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The LIP grants were running through the community recreation centers for about a year.
Okay.
Or over a winter, and then once the Parks Board dropped us as a sponsor, because we wanted to move out of the recreation centers,
Right.
and get a sort of a more of a drop-in, more casual-oriented center going. That was about a year later.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the first apartment block was 73.
Okay.
So things really moved rather fast over about a 2-year period. And then the Coast Foundation Society, I believe, has a brackets 1974 around it. If you look at the, I don't know if it's still the existing charter here in 2010, but I noticed when I walked into the office down the hall,
Right.
they had a plaque on the wall and a certificate, and it had still Coast Foundation Society brackets 1974. Well, I created that.
Okay.
Because I was dealing with CMHC, And 2 days or 3 days before all the subjects were to be removed on this apartment, it's starting to come back to me now, I got a frantic phone call from the manager from the CMHC office, and he said, we can't lend you the money because your society charter does not have the correct winding up clause in terms of disposition of assets.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, the federal government wanted an ongoing security
Right.
in the building in case the 5 of us disappeared.
Right.
And, or some fear, you know,
Yeah,
that
no
they
doubt.
would have. And so we were left about just a few days before the subjects were to be removed.
Right.
And one of the sort of a volunteer I had recruited was a law student. Well, she was articling in here in Vancouver. And I went to her and I said, how quickly can we get a new society charter
Right.
approved by the BC Society, or the companies?
We were talking about we were talking about how Coast became the new, like how you had to
Oh,
institute
1974.
yeah, new
It's
society
Coast Foundation,
clause.
1974.
You were dealing with the
Right.
apartment and
Yeah, with some connections that the lawyer had in Victoria, the articling student and I went over there to Victoria. We had to stay overnight, meet with the department officials who weren't that friendly, you know, having to rush this Societies Act application through in basically 48 hours rather than, you know, 2 or 3 weeks or so. We came back on the ferry and we had it.
right.
And everybody was happy, and we got the money for the building. And then Coast then owned this building with 26, 30 suites approximately,
All right.
full of tenants, full of people.
Yeah.
And nobody in the city, which supported the project, or Victoria, asked how we were going to get them all out of there. And if they had, we'd probably, you know, there was some retrenchment of support,
Right.
because we were going to kick out 30 citizens out of a building and say this is now for the mentally ill,
Right.
right?
And this is so this was to even to renovate it and stuff. Obviously.
CMHC didn't even ask.
Right.
Yeah, no one asked like how are you going to empty your building,
Right.
which is quite touchy, right?
Yeah.
So I just sat down and wrote a letter to all the tenants and politely gave them some money and notice and explained what it was for
Right.
in, you know, non-alarming terms.
Right.
And we had one complaint, they all left. One person was complaining about the grant, who were $100 or something
Right.
to move. You know, this is 1974.
Right.
So they all left.
Amazing.
It was an incredible stroke of fortune.
Right.
And and then we got the building, renovated it, and between Jackie and Vicky and other support people, they moved all the people in. I looked after the building and the contract and the money and
Right.
that sort of thing, yeah. And they moved everybody in, and it was largely a success. You know, most people graduated
Right.
into that setting from the boarding homes.
And we're able to was there a time limit for how long people could stay, or was it considered kind
No,
of
no,
it was
it can be if they could live the rest of their lives there.
Right.
I mean, there was encouragement to become more independent, and some did.
Right.
Two individuals who were quite involved with the organization, two patients were quite involved with the organization and became more independent, got married, and went out to Surrey and got an apartment.
Right.
And so we had our first wedding
Right.
in the group. So it was a lot of reward.
Yeah, it must have been amazing.
And see these people. Well, by this time the province was just totally enthusiastic about this housing, because 30 people out of boarding homes meant 30 more people out of Riverview.
Right.
And so we got support for another building just months later.
Right.
Then we had to find land. So I went back to the city, back to council, through the land department. The city owns some land.
Yeah.
And I was able to find and put an application in and made a presentation to council, and we got to buy some land over just east of Clark Drive. I think it's on 14th. There's a building there.
Yeah.
So we got that land. Went back to CMHC, got another loan commitment, and this was new construction, so we
Right.
had to design one.
Right.
And then a whole bunch of people were involved in that, you know, the clients and staff,
Right.
and we hired an architect. And so the second building started construction.
Right.
And then the province said, well, do another one.
Right.
And I couldn't believe, you know, the support
Right.
at that time. Well, it was all under the NDP government.
Yeah.
There was money for these sorts of things.
Yeah.
The city was very supportive with the council, you know, at the time. And we got money for a third building. Well, the city didn't have another suitable site, they didn't seem to. So I became the real estate expert, I guess, and off I went and did a land assembly down near Commercial Drive. I forget the name of the street, but
Right.
down near Commercial Drive was the third building, and it was about 4 old houses we bought up. And about that time, and then now we're talking about 1975,
Right.
that for my own future, the province approached me in the Ministry of Health and said, well, you know, we have people at Coast that can carry this on, because we'd like to use your experience in other parts of the province. So we hired a new director, and I left Coast, and I went with the province and
Right.
did some consultations for them in Prince George and Surrey and North Vancouver and that sort of thing.
And that was that around housing specifically that you were doing?
Yes, largely housing. And eventually I was assigned to long-term care about I got my master's by that time, so
Right.
it was about 1980, 79 or 80. I was assigned to long-term care because the province moved a lot of those functions over to them from the Ministry of Health, and the government changed to social credit under Bill Bennett.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just a different, you know,
Totally. different.
restructuring of the ministries too.
Yeah.
So, Coast, the new director was Gary Forsgren, I believe the name was, and by this time the office had moved. I was still there, but we had moved the office from the drop-in center,
Right.
because now we had accountant and person involved following up donations and fundraising, and
It had grown.
it had, grown somewhat. So we had about 4 people in the office.
Where was the original drop-in again?
St. Catherine Street in Kingsway.
Okay, that's right, you were
It'd
saying.
be around 16th to 17th where it comes in to
Alright.
Kingsway, and St. Catherine's would be the north-south street. Yeah, it's gone now, but
Yeah.
the building has been torn down and rebuilt. And then we moved the office over to about Main and 14th. There was just a bit of a walk-up office
Right.
for 4 or 5 of us, so the drop-in center could expand. It was being very busy at this time.
Yeah.
And the city gave us money. I did another presentation to council, and we got about $17,000 to buy a bus, rather than the old one that had been donated. So we bought the bus it was known as Ruby. It got renamed by the clients. I think they
Right.
renamed it Ruby, or the staff. I'm not sure.
Right.
And so one of the members and I flew back to Ontario, picked up the bus, and drove it back. It was to save money, where every dollar counted at the
Right.
time. Our time was fine, it didn't cost anything, it seemed, but we go back and drive the bus back. So that became the first Ruby. I gather there's been more Rubies,
Since then.
part of the culture.
Right.
Yeah. And then during the time that I was doing some consulting for the ministry, one of my clients was Coast Foundation. Because they're in Vancouver, and so Coast Foundation continued to have a very close relationship with the Ministry of Health, because now I was working with the Ministry of Health, and Dr. John Cumming was still a strong supporter.
All right.
And that's when the second and third building got built and opened. I wasn't with Coast by the time they were built.
Right.
And then they grew, and then I went on to other things. But
So
Coast continued to grow.
So your involvement ended like at around
70. When 76,
Okay.
later in 76, when I went full-time to the master's program at UBC.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the time.
Although I came back here a few times. By that time, they had got this building
Okay.
here on East 11th,
Right.
which was probably late 75.
Okay.
I think they outgrew that drop-in center.
And so this became they outgrew the one on Main and 14th, is that?
That little office?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gone by then, but then they would have closed that down and moved everybody in here,
All right.
both the administration and the club.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. I came back here and did a little volunteer work, 79, 80,
Right.
I think, when I finished my degree, just around here. And then after that, just lost touch.
Right.
Went on to business, had kids.
Right. Did you see a change, like I'm just thinking about this because we've been talking about Riverview deinstitutionalizing, and did you see a change in the clientele over time, or was it pretty much always people that had just come out of Riverview that accessed coast services, or?
No, there was a bit of a change. Well, additions, more
Right.
additions. I mean, the chronic schizophrenic, manic, depressive individual, or bipolar, chronic, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that age group,
Right.
they were always there.
Yeah,
And that was the bulk of the
people.
population. But we were getting a few more younger people, more acute,
Right.
because VGH psych ward, I think St. Paul's had a psych ward at the time, I can't recall.
Right.
But the VGH psych ward outpatient department kept referring to people to us. They supported us, so they said, help us out.
Yeah.
And then the Vancouver Welfare, which then Human Resources, Provincial Human Resources came in and supplanted that. They wanted some help with some of the younger clients that they had out on the street. By this time, you're starting to see more young single people out on the street with mental illness. And they wanted some help managing their money,
Right.
which we did. I did for a few, and some of the other staff did for others.
Right.
So there was a trend there over a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bit of a change.
yeah.
So you had said earlier you were always aware of MPA and kind of knew what they were doing. Were there any other like community-based groups at the time, or was it
No.
really just the two of you?
No. There was a society called the Loma Society, Lower Mainland
Ask about that.
Association or something. I think it was LOMA.
Yeah.
Not quite sure what that stands for. And it was a group of professionals. Helga Hicks would have been their president.
Okay.
I think her background was social work. And a group of professionals wanted to do something, and they set up a group home. They didn't want the boarding home model.
Right.
They wanted something else, and they set up a group home where it was for young people. And it was one of our houses that was assigned
Oh, okay.
to us.
Right.
So they were young people, young schizophrenics, bipolar, various other diagnoses, I'm sure. And they became very involved with our group because we had the similar approach.
Right.
We wanted to try and create new models
Yeah.
in our respective areas. So we became very close with that group
Right.
and the young people there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned them because that's a name that's come up a few times and I haven't been able to find out more about what
they had a house near Burrard, 11th Avenue, 10th, 11th Avenue.
Right.
Yeah.
So-
I think they wanted to get a second house going, but I don't recall whether they did.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was really just that society and MPA and yourselves then that were.
Well, Canada Mental Health Association, which had already been going 30, 40 years or something, yeah. But we didn't have a lot to do with them. We met with them from time to time,
Right.
for maybe lobbying purposes, but there were no tie-ins to any of their programs.
Right.
Yeah. We regarded them as old guard.
Right.
I don't know how they regarded us. Yeah.
Be interesting to know. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any, I mean, one of the things, you've mentioned a lot of names as we've talked, and that's been great because I've sort of been tracking and we've got them, you know, other people we might want to interview or talk to.
Sure.
To get some of that history. Is there, other than the ones you've mentioned, is there any others that come to mind? I mean, you had mentioned on the phone, the
Well, I
city
mentioned on the
council
phone
folks.
Barb Kaminsky.
Yes, yeah,
She's with
she's
cancer
around.
right now. I think she's CEO or chair,
Yeah.
one of those positions. She was very supportive and knowledgeable about Coast back in the 70s.
Right.
She was with VGH Social Work, I
Right.
think, at the time. I think she moved on to the city social planning. Or it might have been someone else who was with social planning, but there was
Right,
a
but
lady
she-
there that helped us out a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it should be a good connection.
Well, you know, just to give a bit of perspective from institutional side, because she
Yeah.
worked for the hospital.
Right.
The community care teams, we worked with them fairly closely, where the boarding homes were, because they were
Right.
starting to go into the boarding homes. And they regarded us as, you know, one of the support services
Right.
for their efforts. I don't recall any names
There.
from the community care teams, yeah.
Yeah.
Helga Hicks, Loma I
Right.
mentioned, I don't know where she is.
Now. Right.
Yeah, now, yeah. The old coast people are, now Henry Inouye is, I talked to him several years ago, maybe 10 years ago, so he's around somewhere.
Right.
You know, there's several Inouyes in the phone book, but he was a very active
He was
member.
a very active member.
If you can find him.
That'd be interesting too. And did you keep any documents from that time period, or is everything?
I
kind
had
of-
some documents.
Yeah.
I had a couple of annual reports. I had the presentation that we made to the legislative committee
Okay.
in 72, 73. But someone from Coast came out to see me, must have been 15 years ago,
Right.
and they were building up some archives, and I gave them off to that person.
So that would all be here now. You also mentioned on the phone that you had done another interview. at one point
I guess Daryl had a year ago.
Right.
It was just about a year ago, spring. There was a lady here that came to see me at Daryl's request.
Right, to get some
To
history.
get some of the old history. I think her objective was to write an article for the Coast newsletter,
Oh,
you know, on the old days.
yeah,
So we talked about pretty much the same sorts of things that I've talked with you
right.
on the history. Yeah, she'd seen Jackie Hooper, and sort of she was very interested in the housing project and how that got going. So
All right,
I gave her sort of my background on that too.
all right.
Yeah.
So
I don't know where those notes are.
Where those notes are.
I think when I talked to Daryl a few weeks ago, he said he would try and track
Let's
her
try
down.
and track.
I think she's on maternity leave.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else about the history that you wanted to highlight or share?
I'm sure things would come to mind if I start thinking about them or talk
Yeah.
about a particular topic. It was about 3 years of my life.
Yeah, intense, it
And
sounds like.
it's always intense. I mean, when you're 22 and 23 and you get involved in something like that with a number of like-minded people, it does get, it just consumes you,
Yeah,
and you put everything into it. My wife got involved eventually.
okay,
We weren't married at the time,
right,
but she became the first bookkeeper.
okay.
No, she was the second bookkeeper.
Second book.
We didn't do background checks on
Right.
anybody. If you're interested, join us,
All right,
right? If you're a walk-in, as a client,
yeah,
come on in,
yeah,
no questions asked. So we hired a fellow, Raymond Johns, big guy, football player. I think he was from the U.S. There was
Mhm.
draft dodgers in Vancouver at the time.
Right.
This is 71 or something
Yeah.
like that too. Big black fellow,
all right.
very friendly, really nice person. And he said, "I'll do your books." Okay. So, being the administrator,
Yeah,
director administrator, I would get all the the bank statements, and they were addressed to my home because we didn't trust the office. There was not a secure place.
all right,
So I got them in the mail, I went through them, and I saw all these checks made out to Raymond Johns,
all right,
signed by me.
all right.
Well, it wasn't me. $17,000. By this time we'd been getting grants,
Right.
72, 73. And he had forged over a 2-week period all these checks,
Right.
gone to the banks and got them cashed,
Right.
different banks. I guess we won't ask as many questions
Yeah.
at the banks, they didn't then. And just floored us.
Right.
I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And went to the bank, Bank of Montreal, at VGH, they had a branch there.
Right.
Of course, they were our sponsor, VGH.
All right. So.
I thought I was going to get fired. I had to know who would fire,
Right.
you know, and the whole group would just collapse. But no, the Bank of Montreal made good on all the money.
Wow.
And this fellow, as soon as I got the bank statement, mysteriously he disappeared.
Right.
So he was reported to the police and they knew who he was. If we had only asked first. So we needed a new bookkeeper.
Right.
And my wife, my girlfriend, had just finished her teacher's training program at this sort of personal
Right.
stuff, you know, but it's just humorous when you look back on it. Had just finished her teacher's training at SFU,
Right.
gone to a classroom and hated it.
Right.
Was looking for something new. I said, well, try bookkeeping. So she came in as a bookkeeper for the local initiatives grant. And we were running the society and the LIP project for a period of time. They were parallel.
Right.
It was the same organization,
But just different.
yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually we got the society to be the sponsor of the last LIP project.
Right.
So we had total freedom. That's what we were looking for, right? Control,
Right.
freedom, do what we want.
Yeah.
Although we were doing what other people wanted us to do. So when you look back on it. But so she became a bookkeeper for a while.
Right.
So that lasted about a year.
But-
She actually liked coming over and playing bridge at the drop-in center with clients
Right.
who thought we were clients.
Right.
The clients thought we were clients. So when we realized that they thought we were clients, we said, you know, we succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Fabulous.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And anyway, she moved on to. Her experience caused her to become a CA.
Good training ground.
Yeah, I guess so.
But that actually raises an interesting question. I mean, it's sort of come out in the conversation, but kind of like what the structure was of like how power worked in the organization, and you know, it sounds like it was pretty collective in a sense.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah. You might want to delete this later, but there was a little bit of drug-induced culture in
Right.
the background. Not everybody.
Right.
And but there was a little bit of that in the background too. You know, it's 71, 72.
Right.
So we had, you know, unemployed teachers, conservative
Right.
people. There were some that were ex-nurse who's fairly conservative. A couple draft dodgers.
Right.
A couple of ex-hippies.
Right.
We were students who thought they were so cool, but they were everywhere. This whole couple street people, and then eventually clients. It was a real mix that put the whole thing together. So there was no real one philosophy.
Right.
We wanted to do something different. We regarded it as a bit of a somewhat social political statement we were making by doing something different. And we saw these folks, we were looking at these folks, they're medicated, they're in their 40s and 50s, there was an empathy there. You know, how could this happen to them?
Right.
You know, mental illness is caused by society.
Right.
You're not born with it, right?
Right.
So a lot of different influences sort of came in. Couple community organizers who had some community organization experience.
Right.
Were part of this sort of group of people as well. So eventually that became Coast and became more structured as you got buildings and
Right.
had to deal with those kinds of issues and the money. You know, by then I don't know what our annual budget might have been, but it was a few $100,000.
Right. So did that start to shift the philosophy of Coast at all, or shift how? I mean, obviously it would shift how it was run to some extent because you had more money, more people. But is it?
Right. Well, some of it did. There was, after we got the first building, I do recall a fairly acrimonious annual meeting, because the society would have annual meetings. And 2 or 3 of the originals didn't really want to deal with government. they thought that we could, just continue on finding money somewhere,
Right.
because they didn't like the idea that we had to be forced into changing our societies, our charter,
Right.
just to get money.
Yeah.
I think that was, if I recall, that was sort of a key issue. So, well, why do you have to do that? Just tell them it's good enough.
Right.
You're getting co-opted.
Right.
So yeah, there was a bit of a split. Once more money came in, once we started talking with other service providers, government service providers, and what their needs were. Once we got a building and then the land for a second building, there was a bit of a split in the organization, and some of the original people dropped out,
Okay.
or voted out.
Right.
And then some of the clients started voting at that time. Which was unfortunate, because if I recall, that some of the clients were very confused about this.
Right.
The staffers were fighting, and the clients, what do we do?
Right.
Because we just started getting them involved.
Right. So which
And
side?
they thought it was a nice, I'm sure thought this was a great happy family, but we were moving more to becoming a more structured organization.
Yeah.
But wanting to retain a lot of the philosophy and the club atmosphere
Yeah.
and the openness, and others just, they still want to smoke dope once in a while in the building. I said,
Right.
oh, you can't do that. And don't want to get tied in with a lot of government money.
Right.
And so there was one annual meeting, probably 74, that they left.
Right.
And so that, I don't know where they went, but
Right.
we didn't. They actually just dropped out of sight.
Right.
And then about within the year I left, and then good terms. I mean, it was still moving in the direction where I was working, and that is to try and meet more of the needs out there.
Yeah.
So we needed more government support. And then the new director was even more conservative than I was, if I was conservative at all.
Right.
And he was an ex-Xerox employee. And but did very well.
Yeah.
I don't know, I forget how long he was. I think he found this building
Right.
and moved in, yeah. But when I came back here over the next 3 years, off and on, the club atmosphere here looked great.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of the original staffers. And a lot of I recall meeting a number of the clients here, the club members,
Right.
that had been with the organization from the beginning, the original
Okay.
LIP projects.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was a Fred from one of the boarding homes, there was Varden and Grace, the two that got married. There was Frank, who kept thinking UFOs were up there all the time. Right.
So they're real long time membership.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. Wow.
So I think that you get that development in a lot of organizations, community groups.
Yeah.
You get the splits. But really, from the history of some of the groups that I'm aware of, it was pretty stable.
Yeah.
And there was just the one split when, with the buildings, we were getting too structured.
Too structured. Yeah.
For some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they moved on.
Well, and it would seem that Coast has retained, even today, some of the same philosophy pretty strongly.
Well, I can see upstairs,
Yeah.
it's the club.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
same.
Right.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. People out on the street,
Hanging out.
hanging out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see.
Yeah, it's very good to see.
Yeah.
Well, this is really interesting. So, is there anything else before we let you go on to?
I don't know, you'd have to have a specific question, I think.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah,
Quite
I
a
feel
bit of
like
history,
yeah, we've got quite a lot of really interesting history, and some of the things that, of course, that I was interested in, you kind of touched on in terms of, how organizations that start that way at such a grassroots level, how they then garner support, and part of it's the political context that we're operating in of the day that allowed for that, but some of it was obviously the tenacity of the people involved to push it forward.
Yeah.
And,
No, we were a very energetic group.
yeah.
Yeah. And any doors closed to us, then eventually it'll open.
Right.
Knock on it long enough. Yeah. Yeah. No, we had excellent support from the community, from some of the political leaders at the time.
Yeah.
City council, some of the senior civil servants in the Ministry of Health and Mental Health. Alex Porteous was an associate deputy minister. You know, if we're going to record names.
Yeah.
Dr. Tucker, Donald Tucker. He was the deputy minister of mental health.
All right.
And he had been formerly CEO of Riverview Hospital for a long period of time.
Right.
And for an older gentleman where that was his history, I was really amazed at the time as how supportive he was of these community groups.
Right.
You know, and I looked a little bit at the radical at the time, and so you know, people like that were very, very supportive and got us funds. They were interested in the housing components.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Good. And some of the social workers, like the Barb Kaminsky, who was with VGH, and some of the community care team members, they were quite supportive. Yeah.
So just one last question then. So in the time that you were involved, was there, because as we said before, most people were not really trained formally in mental health who were working with Coast. Was there a shift around that? Was there a call to bring in more formally trained people?
Not in my time, no.
Not in your time, yeah.
No, I don't know if that's here now.
Right.
I think in some of the care facilities, it must be.
Yeah.
But with independent housing, individuals who are responsible for their own medication.
Right.
There would be a supportive person on staff. If not residing in the building, you know, they would reside close by,
Right.
be on call. This is where we would be liaising with the community care teams.
Right.
Because at that time the community care teams were getting established. There was one in the West End. Dr. Hugh Parfit was the leader of that group. I think he was one of the first community care team psychiatrists.
Right.
And he was very supportive of it. And I think the apartment building was in his area. A brand new team,
Okay.
new team members, and then we were putting 30 people in this one building
Right.
in his area. So, you know, they would meet any of the medical needs.
Right.
You know, there'd be the odd readmission.
Right.
We had one suicide. We thought it was a suicide, but it turned out to be a brain hemorrhage. But
Oh.
that
Okay.
was terrible. I was there that day, and police were there, and yeah, that was pretty sad.
So was
Case, it was one of the young fellows
Right.
that had medical issues. We thought it was a suicide, but I mean, he died right there in the room.
Right.
But that was the only serious incident I recall.
Right.
But,
So it sounds like people actually were quite successful when they
a lot of them.
moved. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah. So yeah, it was non-professional throughout.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your
Okay,
time.
no.
This is really, really helpful for me to just have a whole bunch of things have fallen into place in terms of the history.
Okay.
and
Yeah.
how it's all.
Yeah. Well, give me a call.
Yeah, well, I might,
if there's
if
something
there's,
comes up, if you go through your notes.
yeah, there might be
Yeah,
things
the
to sort
interview.
of follow up on.